In today's episode, we'll be talking about the Zeigler furniture store murders over a hearty meatball sub. On Christmas Eve in 1975, Winter Garden, Florida police officers were in for a frightening present: a 4-person homicide case. That evening, the bodies of Eunice Zeigler, her parents Perry and Virginia Edwards, and a customer, Charlie Mays, were all found lifeless and riddled with bullets in Zeigler's furniture store. Eunice's husband and the store owner, Tommy Zeigler, had also been fired at, but his wounds weren't nearly as bad, and he survived to tell the story. So I have my meatballs here, and I'm just gonna bake them. He was also the one who called for help that night at 9:15. When the police first arrived at the scene, Tommy was trying to get out of the furniture store, which was locked from the outside. The cops were able to get the door open, where they found Tommy covered in fluid. He was rushed to a hospital for medical attention, and the police chief went over there to ask him about what happened. Tommy said that the customer, Charlie Mays, was the one who committed the crime. He claimed Charlie was trying to rob the store that night, and Tommy admitted to firing at Charlie out of self-defense. Now, at this point, the cops hadn't even gone into the furniture store to secure and search the scene. They had already gone to the hospital for a witness statement before even assessing what happened. Apparently, the police hadn't gone into the furniture store because they didn't have their weapons at the time. It sounds weird, but I think the people who first responded, like the police chief, were at some holiday party at some dude's house who was a judge and attorney for the city. So they were off duty. At the time, they had no idea that Charlie was deceased, and they thought maybe he was still in there with a weapon or something. Anyway, an officer was sent out to get weapons, and when he came back, the police finally entered the furniture store. But the lights weren't working, so it was super eerie. With flashlights and weapons drawn, officers walked through to find the corpses of Eunice, Perry, Virginia, and Charlie. This is when they realized Charlie was lifeless. He was lying in a pool of fluid and had money coming out of his pockets. Near Charlie's body, officials found the cash box. I'm gonna heat up some tomato sauce in my pot. Okay, so that matches with Tommy's robbery gone wrong story. At that point, Charlie was the only positive ID the first responders could make. They didn't even know who Eunice was, and even had other officers going out to look for her and her parents without even knowing they were the bodies found in the store. So during the investigation, officers reported that a total of 28 bullets had been fired from up to 8 different weapons. One of those bullets hit a clock on the wall that stopped after it was hit. The time it read was 7:24 p.m. But Tommy didn't call for help until 9:15 to 9:30-ish. So what happened in those 2 hours? As detectives noted the evidence they had, they started to realize some strange elements that made Tommy seem more like the main suspect than a victim. When first responders arrived, they claimed the fluid stains on Tommy's shirt and shoes were dry, and the DNA on Tommy's shirt was type A. Tommy had type O blood, but Perry, who was Tommy's father-in-law, had type A blood. When investigators looked at the spatter in the back of the furniture store, they noticed that Charlie's fluid had dried on top of Perry's. Based on this evidence, officials concluded Perry was most likely snuffed 15 to 30 minutes before Charlie was. If the crime went down as Tommy explained, it seems like all 4 victims would have been snuffed within minutes, if not seconds, of one another. There were also red footprints found throughout the store to suggest someone walked around the crime scene before the cops arrived. And 2 holsters were found by Perry and Charlie, but the police found reason to believe they had been placed there by someone else because there was no fluid on them, even though they were lying on top of dried fluid. In total, detectives found 5 firearms at the scene, even though they believed at least 3 more were involved. 4 of the 5 weapons collected from the furniture store had already been cleaned. 3 of the 5 were registered to Tommy, and 2 of the 5 were cheap, small caliber revolvers referred to as Saturday Night Specials. The Saturday Night Specials weren't registered to Tommy, and when officials asked if they were his, he rejected them because he said he'd never purchased such cheap weapons. Based on all of this evidence, investigators theorized Tommy was the perp and that he tried his darndest to make it look like someone else did it. That night, one of Charlie's friends, Felton Thomas, went to the police with important information about the case. Felton said that he went to the furniture store with Charlie that day to help him get a new TV that he was going to give his family for Christmas. The two were supposed to meet Tommy at the furniture store at 7:30, but when they got there, the lights were off, and it didn't look like Tommy was inside. Felton and Charlie parked in a nearby parking lot to wait. While they were sitting in the car, Tommy came up to them and told them to get in his car. They did, and Tommy drove them out to an orange grove. When Tommy pulled up to the orange grove, he told the men to get out and try his new firearms that were in a paper bag on the floorboard of the car. Tommy said he was supposed to be testing these weapons so he could sell them, which is why he asked for Felton and Charlie's opinions on if the firearms were good or not. Maybe Charlie was trying to get these guys' fingerprints on them so he could frame them? But wait, things get even shadier. So the men all got back in the car and Tommy drove to the furniture store. When they got out, Tommy asked Felton to go to the breaker box outside and turn off the electricity to the store. After that, the three men met up in the parking lot where Charlie's van was. Felton said Tommy apparently didn't have the key to the store, but still wanted to give Charlie the TV, so he grabbed a metal pipe and shattered a window so he could get in. Charlie and Felton just stood there and looked at him like, we're good, fam. But then Tommy was like, okay, I guess we can do this the right way. Can we drive to my house so I can get the keys to the store? So all three men drove over to Tommy's house, and on the ride back to the store, Tommy handed Felton a firearm and told him to load it with bullets. At that point, Felton was not vibing with Tommy, so as soon as they got back to the store, Felton dipped, leaving Charlie to pick up the TV for himself. As crazy as this story sounds, police officers went out to the orange grove and found a bullet that matched one of the weapons that they recovered at the store. And Felton wasn't the only person who came forward with some tea on Tommy. That same night, one of the Zeigler's longtime family friends, Ed Williams, showed up at the police station to share some information about the case. Ed helped Tommy out at the furniture store from time to time, and he had been recently laid off. He said that Tommy asked him to help out with a few things that day, and he agreed. Tommy had Ed pick him up from his house and drive him to the furniture store. Ed did, and when he pulled up to the front, Tommy jumped out and asked Ed to back his truck up to the back door of the store and meet him inside. Ed walked into the store and through the pitch black hallway to find Tommy standing there with a revolver in his hand. He said Tommy pointed the weapon straight at him and fired 3 times, but it jammed up. Moments later, Tommy was all like, "Oh, LOL, I didn't know that was you, Ed. I wasn't trying to execute you, I promise." Ed wasn't buying it, but Tommy persisted. He literally tried to give the revolver to Ed to prove he didn't mean to knock him out. Still on edge, Ed bolted out of the store and ran to the nearby KFC so he could use their phone to call the cops. When he couldn't get through, it was on to plan B. So Ed's plan B was to pick up his other car at the shop, which he drove to the station to tell officers his story. Now at this point, there were so many stories floating around that it seemed hard to tell who was correct. But when Ed pulled out the revolver Tommy used on him, investigators were like, "We're listening." Yeah, so Ed told them he had the weapon because if you remember, Tommy kept trying to give it to him to prove he didn't mean to pull the trigger on his friend. Detectives then collected the firearm in addition to Ed's clothing for further testing. Ballistics specialists did some testing on the firearm and determined the bullets used on Perry and Virginia came from that exact weapon. So that either means Tommy really did snuff his in-laws, or maybe Ed did and tried to frame Tommy for it. Okay, so now I'm gonna toast my bread in the oven. When Tommy was told about Ed turning in the weapon, he said it had been stolen from his truck 2 weeks before the crime. And Ed had access to the truck, so it's possible he could have stolen it. To make things even more confusing, one witness said he bought one of the Saturday night specials found at the scene, the one that was used to whack Eunice. The witness reportedly purchased the revolver for Tommy, but he gave it to Ed, who served as the middleman. Officials weren't able to tell if Ed ever passed it along to Tommy, so some people theorized Ed was the criminal, but most people, including the investigators, still thought it was Tommy. After reviewing the evidence and witness statements, here's the story detectives came up with. Tommy and his wife Eunice showed up at the furniture store sometime around 7 p.m. to meet Eunice's parents, who were going to pick up chairs or something. But before his in-laws arrived, Tommy sent a bullet to the back of Eunice's head, which ultimately caused her demise. Minutes later, Tommy's in-laws pulled up and immediately noticed something wasn't right. Virginia ran away, but Tommy chased after her and hit her with bullets. Tommy then went for Perry, firing his weapon 3 times. The bullets didn't knock out Perry, so Tommy hit him in the head and fired 2 more bullets at close range to make sure his father-in-law wouldn't see the light of day. Not long after that, Charlie and Felton rolled up, and Tommy took them on the Orange Grove excursion, which was super quick. Defense attorneys say the trip was too quick for it to actually happen the way Felton said it did. But in the detectives' theory, it was possible. And after Felton left, the 2 other men went into the store, which is where Tommy killed Charlie. Here's where Ed's testimony comes into play. So after all 4 victims had been slain, Tommy went back to his house to meet Ed. Then Ed's whole scene played out as I previously described it. And detectives believe Tommy pulled the trigger on himself in the side to make it look like he was a victim, in addition to him smashing the window and turning off the electricity to make it look like a break-in. So that story seems extremely elaborate, but for whatever reason, that's what the detectives went with. Okay, so now I'm gonna start assembling my meatball subs with my bread, my meatballs, sun-dried tomatoes, basil, and my tomato sauce. At the time, they didn't have a motive, but when they searched Tommy's home, they found 2 life insurance policies for Eunice that totaled $500,000. Both policies had been purchased for Eunice in the past few months. On December 29th, police officers visited Tommy in the hospital to put him under arrest. Tommy was indicted on 4 counts of first-degree homicide, and in less than 2 months, he went to trial. In addition to the witness statements and incriminating pieces of evidence, the prosecution team also pointed out many of the rumors that had been floating around about Tommy, like how his and Eunice's marriage was struggling, and how some people thought he was gay. That second rumor was pretty popular because some people believed Eunice was planning on outing Tommy for his sexuality and leaving him, both of which Tommy probably wouldn't want, hence why he might want Eunice gone. Here's the thing though. Tommy's trial happened so fast that some of the evidence test results hadn't come in, and many witness statements had gone unreported. When Tommy took the stand, he did his best at convincing the courtroom he was innocent. He said he took out the insurance policies because it was recommended to him by his lawyer, because Eunice was just labeled a director of the furniture store. But as innocent as Tommy claimed to be, the jury found him guilty on all charges. The jury suggested Tommy serve life in jail, but the judge gave him the ultimate punishment. And there's some drama between Tommy and the judge because they had been in a legal battle in the past, so some people think that's why the judge gave him such a harsh sentence. In 1982, Tommy was scheduled to be executed, but the Jacksonville U.S. District Court delayed it due to new evidence. His date was then moved to May 20th, 1986. But again, it was pushed back by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeal due to inadequate representation. In 1988, his lethal sentence was overturned, only for him to be resentenced and given the ultimate penalty again. In 2001, Tommy's legal team was given permission for DNA testing. His clothes were retested, and the red spatter was actually a match for Charlie, not Perry. And some of Charlie's clothing had Perry's DNA on it. Despite the false results from the initial investigation, the judge didn't think the new results proved Tommy wasn't guilty, so he remained on death row. In 2005, Tommy's legal team requested a new trial, but got denied. 5 years later, Tommy's team got the green light to try new touch DNA testing, but then the courts took that back. In 2013, 2016, and 2017, his team tried to get even more DNA testing done, and all 3 times they were denied. Most recently, in June of 2021, the state attorney finally approved a request for DNA testing in Tommy Zeigler's case. But now the office of the Florida Attorney General isn't letting them because the agreement doesn't comply with the state procedural rules. So at the moment, Tommy Zeigler still faces lethal execution. You know, as much as the prosecution painted Tommy to be guilty, I feel like there's no way to prove that he, without a doubt, was responsible for executing his wife, in-laws, and a loyal customer. I get that there was some sketchy DNA evidence, but honestly, everyone's DNA was everywhere, and Tommy was at the scene either way. The prosecution's case also seemed to be based primarily on witness statements, which can be skewed, especially if the witnesses are the real perps. So how do we know Tommy really wasn't another victim, and that he was wrongly convicted and is now sitting in prison without the luxury of dank eats, like this meatball sub? Well, that's all for now. See you next time on Killer Bites.